Everyday use is going to be the story that I'm going to be going over today. I wanted to talk about the changing generations and how the young African Americans of this time seem to lose their identity through the movements that they were going through. A little background knowledge before we get started. Alice Walker was the youngest of 8 children. She was born in rural Eden, Georgia in 1944. The Everyday Use was written as a part of a story collection in 1973 to take place in around the 1960s. The story showed a clash between two generations. The older generation, between heritage from grandparents and before, and the new generation trying to find their identity, which was getting away from the traditional heritage of like slavery that they were still trying to break away from in this time period. Mama in this story was a good old-fashioned black woman. She had great value in family and remembering her past. She always wanted to give her children the best that she possibly could and wanted to give them opportunities. This is one of the reasons that she let Dee go off to college and was also so excited when she came back after not seeing her for a very long time. Dee, or Wanjero if we go by her name change, was the other daughter of Mama. She left to go find greener pastures, to go broaden her horizon. But going off to college also opened the door to many new people that she would meet. This including other young African Americans that were very similar to her in trying to start their own thing, trying to pave their own path. This included trying to break away from what they believed was their traditional role, still involving slavery. This goes back to trying to find their own identity. This included breaking away from their heritage, what I believe was their true heritage, but to them their true heritage was from when they came from Africa. Now we get to what I consider the two characters that supported both of these generations the best. I mean, Mama was from the generation, so obviously she's living it, but Maggie followed in Mother's footsteps, while Wanjero was influenced by Hakima Barber to follow in the new generation's footsteps. These two characters represented one from old and one from new. Maggie took value in her family and her heritage, especially in the way she lived the items that they had. While Hakima Barber, on the other hand, was more of the guy who was in the African American movement of the time, finding his true heritage, which they believed was from Africa. Which it was at that time, but it wasn't really their true self of where they actually came from, who they actually were around. Like I said, Hakeem Barber, on the other hand, represents the newer generation. In my opinion, the reason that Dee changed, or into Wanjero, the person that she actually was when she showed up at Mama's house. This was the new African American generation, the ones trying to show themselves to the older generation that this is who they are, this is who they're going to become, trying to break from the traditional roles that they had of society at that time. The first example of changing generations was how they view things. The dasher or butter tray in Mama's house was made from the uncle. It was made for them to have use out of for an everyday thing, something that they could take pride in, that has past generations' memories in it. Not just a churn, but part of their family. And to Dee, that was just an item. But she didn't understand that Mama had so many feelings tied up in that, so just asking Mama for an item like this didn't really make sense, because it was more than just a churn, more than just a dasher. It was part of their livelihood, of what they remember from the ones that passed. This is another great example that I see from one of the articles about identity lost, how Dee was confused about herself and heritage. Here's the quote. The story makes clear that Dee is equally confused about the nature of her inheritance, both from her immediate family and from the larger black tradition. Here we can see that Dee has always been about the appearance and the it thing. It is even said in the story that Dee has always had a style of her own, that she wanted to make her own way, pave her own path, that she wanted to be the trend starter. So This is why when this was the it thing going on, going back to your true African heritage, that she jumped right on that boat, right on that train, and just rode it. Instead of trying to truly understand what was meant behind this movement, she just cared about that it was the movement of the time and not so much if it was the right or wrong thing to do. This is another great example from an article. Her quest is ultimately selfish, and Walker focuses the reader's growing dislike for the heroine in her indifference to Maggie. This is basically talking about the whole altercation with the quilt. How Dee was basically just saying that Maggie was going to use it for everyday use, hence the title of the story. How she thought it should be framed, cherished, but the way that she thought it should be cherished was other people viewing it saying, this is how I live. Instead of truly understanding that the quilt was made from cloths of the past generations of that family, that each one was grandparents, grandmothers, past generations that they can't have back now because they're gone, and now it's a way for them to remember them. But to Dee, it's not something as meaningful as that, which is just another example of how Dee lost her identity. And another example on top of that is the young African American generation of that time, how they viewed similar heritage situations the same way. How to them it was an item, but to the family it was way more than that, which caused the headbutting that happened. Lastly, like I was saying earlier, probably the biggest example in the book, or the short story, of lost identity and the ever-swaying tide of heritage was the quilt. The quilt represented a bundle of grandparents, everybody, of generations of teaching and love to Mama and Maggie. Maggie understood this, but to Dee it was just an exhibit piece. It is even shown in the story when Maggie says that she can remember them without the quilt. She is insulting Dee in this situation because she's basically telling Dee that she forgot her heritage. She doesn't know where she came from, and to her, this is just all items, just all basically meaningless. But to Mama and Maggie, this is their life. This is what they grew up around, and so did Dee. But I guess going off to college changed that view, and this is what made Mama so angry at Dee in this situation. It was because she forgot who she was. In conclusion, Everyday Use is a great example of showing the generation gap and a group of people searching for their identity, truly trying to find it, but still lost in the world. Like Dee, for example, when she accuses a Mama not knowing where she really came from, which in my opinion is a joke, because Mama understands where she came from, and Dee should understand that her family is who her heritage is. That's who she should realize is where her true identity lies, not in chasing some heritage that has no relation to who she really is. Like I said, other African Americans probably experienced this same thing with the two generation gaps butting head, the old and the new, trying really to understand each other, but not meeting on the same terms. Thank you guys for listening to my PowerPoint and hope you enjoyed it.